right, good afternoon, everyone. So, as Ngayo said, we are here to discuss the future of cannabis and the impact that the stigmas have. So we have here Stephen Martin Mayer from PhytoFlow, and he's an expert on the Colombian markets. We have Viola Brunatelli, who's from Cannabis Schizza, and I probably pronounced that incorrectly, I apologize, who's an expert on the Italian and Swiss markets. We have Rebecca Allentap, who is from AGI, who's an expert on American and UK markets. And then we have Stefan Roll, the CEO of Hemp Group, and the president of Gushi Culture Ibiza, and a specialist on the German and Spanish markets. So, we're gonna open our question with, we're gonna open this panel discussion with, from the countries that you're in, what types of social stigmas have you experienced?
So I actually grew up in Europe, so I'm not Colombian. I had more than 15 years working in Spain, but the last 4 years I've been working in Colombia for a company called Plena Global. Colombia is very interesting when it comes to stigma, because obviously the first thing that comes to our minds when we think of Colombia is probably Netflix, the Narcos series, right? So, and we before you fly there the first time, that's the feeling you get is, I'm gonna go there and maybe Pablo is still alive. The truth is, in the last 10 years there's been great changes, and that has also been a strategy of the government, is that since drugs are there and they are being consumed, and you can accuse Colombia of producing cocaine, but somebody is buying it and somebody is consuming it, apparently. So why not try to make a legal market out of that and kind of refresh the image of Colombia by also bringing economic opportunities which are legal. So that has been a very interesting experience for me to go and be part of this experiment, so to say. Though you still really feel, when you say that you're working with cannabis in Colombia, the first reaction is, so why are you here? Why are you talking to me? No, call the cops. And then you explain there is a medical, legal market and things change.
So Rebecca, what about the US?
So the U.S. has continued to evolve. When I was growing up, it was very much I lived in California, so it was very much like the Snoop Dogg, kind of, you know, Cheech and Chong. That's really what you saw a lot of. But as it started to legalize, we saw it just completely changed. You'd go into a dispensary and you'd see, you know, your neighbor's grandma, you know, you'd see, you know, your coworkers, you'd see every person there. So I think that legalization has really helped to change the stigma and shift it. But the interesting thing is now, because it's so political, we're seeing that shift again. So recently in the US, I'm sure you all know, there's an epidemic of gun violence, and there's been plenty of school shootings, and now those are actually being tied into cannabis use. So we're seeing a whole new manifestation of a war on drugs happening, and stigma is the driving force behind that. So like everywhere else, I think it's just continuously evolving.
Yeah, I would say in Germany, since the talk of the legalization, it's getting better, but still when you talk to people and say that you're a cannabis consumer, the most people think you're a lazy pothead. And that's truly not true, that's not the truth. But when I compare it to Spain, there cannabis is more part of the culture. There we have the cannabis social clubs, and like smoking cannabis for recreational use is there not a big deal. This is what my experience is.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here after lunch. Thank you to digest with us. I come from Italy. I'm working currently both in Italy and in Switzerland. In Italy we had legal medical cannabis for now 10 years, almost 10 years. And although we were just discussing this, one thing is changing regulations. It takes time, but it doesn't take as much time as changing a culture. So one of the things, for example, that we still notice is the choice of words that still are trying to, in some ways, feel less aggressive. So even many doctors, so I train healthcare professionals, this is what we do with our company. And often we have, our students that are medical doctors that instead of using the word cannabis, they still say canapa medica, which is medical hemp, because in some ways it feels less dangerous. It feels less of a drug, because what they heard for so many years is that cannabis was just associated with a narcotic and with something completely illicit. So the moment that they find themselves actually having the possibility to prescribe it legally in their office, in their medical practice, they need to find ways to feel better about that. And so changing a culture, it will take way longer. So I would say it's a sort of like George Orwell 1984 idea. So if you don't have the word, you don't think about it. And so, for example, I would assume that in the States, that there is still very strong this idea of the marijuana word still used for a very strong stigma around it, and the type of consumers actually, or the type of people around the marijuana world, right?
So it's actually being like taken out of like some of the regulation work. So like Washington State actually just made it so that marijuana is no longer a terminology used in any of their compliance or regulatory policies.
So here's a question then, and it's actually just listening to you guys, it's governments and large corporations that are creating stigmas as well now, or feeding into this, which is causing confusion, because as you're pointing out, hemp versus cannabis is not the same thing.
Yeah, it's I have a CBD company, and when you speak with people outside of the industry and you tell them, yeah, I work in the legal cannabis industry and CBD, the most people start smiling and saying, yeah, it makes you high, and it's not about this. It's more than making you high, and this is a stigma in the industry.
And then that's an interesting thing as well, because cannabis does make you high. But people, when they want to talk about being a patient, it's about easing pain. And nobody wants to acknowledge the high part of it. And again, that's a stigma. What's wrong with being high?
Yeah, I would like to add that often, from a medical perspective, you can see euphoria described as a side effect. Excuse me, but I think euphoria is a pretty decent effect to be given to a patient, to be honest with you.
Okay, so as a patient, I'm trying to say, I hate that stigma. I hate that I have to feel uncomfortable about my cannabis use, especially like if I'm using it and I'm just trying to use it to relax. I'm not using it for whatever I would typically use. I'm using it because sometimes I'm out and I don't want to drink, so I bring my own stuff. But I feel I have to kind of hide it, because I'm like almost then like, okay, well, I'm not helping the patient cause if I'm using cannabis outside of medicinal use, because we have everything has to be in a neat box, cannabis, hemp, patient, recreational, medical. We have to have these clear, defined boxes, and I think that this is something that's not going to easily fit, and I think that we're finding that.
Well, and it's interesting, and you can ask yourself this question, if you use cannabis, how do you say you use it? How do you categorize yourself? Do you call yourself a patient? Because if you are, do you have a prescription? If you do, where did you get it from?
Yeah, I guess it also opens up a big conversation here, or a big issue to understand also when wellness ends and medical starts. Because if I go to the spa and I get a massage, maybe that's the reason why I'm not going into surgery, because I have a real issue with my back. You see what I mean? So that there is a certain preventive action that wellness does, and in that direction, I think it's important to understand that it's not a defined, a defined concept, and around this there is a lot to do with what do you do. You might not be sick, but you are absorbing a lot of stress on the workplace, no? And so is having a little smoke at night something that is just recreational adult use, or is it maybe something that prevents you than to get into serious anxiety and all these kind of, more complicated...
Sleep better.
Exactly. Sleep quality, very important. So there, I think there is a lot of confusion, but this confusion, we tend to try to put it into the same categories. Okay, yesterday I was having a conversation with a doctor and said, yeah, but with morphine, we have morphine, and there's a scale, and you can... Yeah, okay, but this is not morphine, I understand dosage with morphine, you want to be very careful, or it might be the last thing you do, but with cannabis, you can self-titrate, and you probably, or most certainly won't die, and you will just like riding a bicycle, you have to find your own equilibrium, but then you will understand what is the limit, right?
But that is making people accountable for their own behavior, and every society struggles with that.
Yes.
So that's why I want to jump in. We've all talked about this, the importance of setting intention with your use. Regardless of how you're using it, you need to have intention. Intention and setting is not just for psychedelics. And I think that we should really incorporate that into cannabis use as well, and really getting into the mind frame of why am I using this? What is my goal? What is my intention? And what do I want to get out of it? And I think that if we just took that time and put space between action and reaction, and really thought about what we were doing, not just with with eating, so just putting food in your face. Same thing with using any kind of recreational or medical drug. Why are we using it, and how long was the intention behind it?
So then, that's a very good point. And again, I'm going to say that's accountability that people don't want. What else? Nothing? What about, let's talk about the illicit market and the stigmas behind that. Anybody?
All right, so I'll take that. I came from the US, obviously, so it's our war on drugs has influenced the world, which we are, I will be the first to be here and say sorry, everyone, for all of this on behalf of my country. So it's challenging because then we've kind of taken this other stigma direction, which I think is interesting, where you hear so much about the illicit market and the black market, right? And they're like demonized thugs. Whereas, yeah, but my experience is like, I definitely sourced illicitly plenty of times with it, and I would get things like special strains for what I'm looking for. They would do more testing than some of the producers that I actually can purchase through on the prescription route. I can actually get a COA from my illicit source easier than I can get one from a prescription pharmacy in the UK. They also will tell me kind of what to expect. Here's the terpene profiles and give me more information on it. Here's what it will feel like. My doctors can't tell me that. So there's not a lot of incentive. I think that that's another way to push people into, more of the standardized format, is by demonizing the illicit market, because there's also that caregiver model in California. In the 90s when medical became legal, there was the caregiver format where people would grow in a community for patients in their community. And I think that's something we really need to explore, but they're really making it challenging for individual growers.
And do you feel that when it comes to quality, illicit versus the large corporations?
Yeah, at Europa, we were like opening up our flowers. Smell this, smell this. You can tell a difference. The nose knows. It's a completely different quality, but that's also building a relationship. There's a human relationship factor there as well. I don't know my producers if I go through the prescription route. It's picked for me. But if I go through my local grower, I know what he likes, his interests, what matters to him, so I know how he cares about growing the plant and the people he's caring for. So there's just that relationship there. I think that's something we're missing.
All right, let's talk about, what do you see in the near future? What changes do you see coming when it comes to stigmas and the impacts it's going to have?
Yeah, one thing I really feel should be addressed is, especially even the mainstream media speaks about it all the time, is that there is this feeling that cannabis will be consumed once it's legal. No? And there are hundreds of millions of consumers. Yesterday night, I don't know if somebody was here at the smoking area of the concert, but it smelled familiar to me. So cannabis is already being consumed. The question is, what will happen once it's legal? And the feeling is also that once it's legal, all the problems are solved. But you've seen that with gay rights, for example. Now we have gay rights in Europe, but you can still go to rural areas and walk hand in hand, same sex, and probably they'll throw stones at you. So it doesn't change with the legality. The legality is not the beginning and it's not the end. The legality is a change in compliance. It's a change in how the legal system and the society processes whatever your personal consumption is. But the fight goes on, and I think it's very important that as an industry we also get together. Of course, we are all working for competing companies, but we get together and realize that tobacco and alcohol have strong lobbies. They work together to get the best rules, so then they can play the game of I sell more than you. But before there is a lobby, and I have the feeling that the cannabis industry still has to mature a lot in that aspect, so that the fight will go on and the changes will occur also after big changes like in Germany occur. This is an ongoing process, and especially to remove the stigma. I was giving you the example the other day very quickly. If I was at a graduation, someone getting, finishing university, if I bring a bottle of champagne, I'm seen as a very nice person. If I bring a bong, probably I'm going to be looked at, who's this weirdo, call security. And that really shows you the stigma, because at that moment we should be allowed to party or celebrate in whatever form or shape we feel is the right one, right?
Yeah, and when you come to conferences, you get drinks for free, but why don't you get joints for free?
Now you're pushing it.
You actually get in trouble. I've seen other shows. This is a cannabis conference. Don't smoke that out for here.
Maybe that's the idea for the next ICBC.
There's a suggestion. So then another stigma tying into this, the legal side of it. If the fear is behind getting charged, or
yeah. It's I would say for a lot of cannabis patients in Germany right now, the only reason there are patients is to don't get fined from the police. Because as a cannabis patient like me, I have some pain, but this is my most reason to be a patient is to don't get in trouble with the cops when I have my weed with me, when I travel, when I smoke. And there's also
okay. So you called yourself a patient.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is that when everything is organized and legal, rec side, medical side, will you still call yourself a patient?
It depends on the laws. I hopefully not. I'm a recreational user, and I know the benefits. For me, cannabis is like a superfood. I use it in my daily nutrition. I use not just THC. I use CBD, CBG, all the variety of cannabis. It's not just to make you high, like I said before. If we are able to talk more openly about cannabis, that can give us much more.
That's true.
Maybe I'm gonna have a slightly different opinion on this. For example, in my country, in Italy, I would say probably around max 5% of the patients are there because have a prescription because they are recreational consumers. However you want to call it recreational consumer. I really like Stefan's wellness concept because I think it really makes a good point. For several reasons. I mean, the prescription process isn't really smooth, like in most countries still. The black market is still cheaper than going through a pharmacy. So actually, the majority, I would say the 80%, 75% of the patients that we have for the medical market in Italy are naive to cannabis. They never tried cannabis before. What I'm fearing for the future in Europe, moving towards a direction of recreational market, which of course we're all looking forward to, is that this is going to happen before a true maturing of the medical market. What do I mean with a true, arriving to a true mature point What I mean is at least getting free healthcare, meaning a totally reimbursed medication for the medical market. So in that way, I can ensure that patients actually are still getting a product that has the highest quality possible. And then, of course, as much as we can go to a store and buy wine or go in a bar and get our glass, of course I'm looking forward to a recreational market. But if we implement it now, in which our medical markets are still not, I mean the majority of prescription, both here in Germany, in Italy, in the active medical markets, let's say, they're still private. So this is going to create a huge issue because, of course, the moment that you have a smoother path through a rec market than the medical market, any person that needs cannabis, even for medical reasons, is going to go through that market. And what's going to be the guarantee for that patient? Very, very little. So I'm looking forward for everything to move fast, but mainly for insurances and public healthcare to really take this on board, because otherwise we are not creating a really good scenario for patients, to be honest.
It's very good points. And then I'm going to touch on the pros and cons of growing your own. So as a patient, if you're able to grow your own flower and consume it at your own risk, if you know what you're doing, but where do you see that going? What are the pros and cons with growing your own flower then?
Maybe here I have a little bit of a controversial, usually, opinion, because I was once in Uruguay and I had quite a few mothers running after me. In that case, it was an association called Mama Cultiva, and it was mothers growing for their own kids, which were affected by epilepsy. And I gave the negative opinion on that kind of situation, because I feel this is a very serious condition, and you need to know exactly what dosage, what exactly the kids are getting, and especially you need to go through quality control. Intentions are not the only good thing that you can do. It's a good thing to have good intentions, but contaminations, they come also with good intentions. So cannabis absorbs contamination from the soil, from the air. You can do a lot of bad things. A thorough quality control of a batch would cost you, I would say, between $2,000 and $3,000 if you want to go and see pesticides, heavy metal, all the microbiology. And so there, depending on the condition, I am not so much in favor of people growing for themselves. Like, on the other side, I met adults in Canada which were on a wheelchair because they were actually, in a traffic accident. Actually, the driver in this example I'm thinking right now was a drunk, so he was also a victim of a drunk driver, and he was growing his own cannabis. Now it was for a condition of chronic pain. In this case, I justify the consumption much more than in a kid with epilepsy, because first of all, there was also the beautiful experience of growing your own medicine, which was, he was really proud of his own plants. But, adult use, chronic pain, you find also what's the right genetic for yourself. That is much more of a easy to accept personal consumption or personal growing. That's a little bit my opinion.
But I wouldn't think there is a problem with the pesticides and stuff like this, because right now everybody allowed to grow their own tomatoes or fruits or stuff, and the people do it. And they know what they do. They want to have it like a hobby and want to do something special, totally organic, stuff like this. And I think this is the direction where home grow goes. It's when you look at alcohol, it's not forbidden to make your own, but who does it? Just really few have something special for a special night for friends. And I think it will be the same with cannabis. Sure, there will be some guys who are growing their own cannabis right now, and they will do it in the future for their friends. They just don't have to fear about the police anymore.
So even like in the US, like some of the stuff that's even grown that's sold through dispensaries, you go in and you think, oh, it's safe, it's been tested for everything, but that's actually not the case. Like, even going through and buying something that has to go through like a rigmarole of rules and metric system and all that BS, there's still not good testing standards for things like microbials, and heavy metals and pesticides, and each state has different ones. So it's kind of like looking at that model and then exploring the home grow. I don't really know where there's a good, satisfied model already in existence, because even what you're buying and you think is safe isn't safe, and there just aren't proper standards for testing out yet.
And at the same time, let's say everybody is able to grow the best flower ever. This is also very disruptive for the large corporations. So what type of impact do you think they would want to impose on a stigma now around the way you're going to grow your flower? You know?
I wanted to just continue the conversation on homegrown and the direction it probably will go. I tend to agree with what Stefan is saying. I don't necessarily see it as a solution for medical, absolutely. But at the same time, there is a lot of untapped potential in cannabis. We are all thinking about decarboxylated cannabis. And when I think about homegrown, I actually think about wellness and getting my own fresh, raw juice of cannabinoid acids and flavonoids and a lot of good stuff that I wouldn't be able to get anywhere in a shop, whether that's a recreational market or a medical market. And really from using the roots of the plant to the sprouts, there is so many compounds, interesting triterpenoids, and a lot of stuff beyond cannabinoids that is incredibly interesting on a wellness perspective. So, and also, I mean, to be a bit the crazy neuroscientist, I think it's also important to really think about, let's say, the manufacturing process, as in the growing process, and the type of energy that you put in it. And of course, that's, I mean, very up in the air, maybe, but for a lot of like ancient culture it wasn't, because if you think about how, for example, Ayurvedic medicine are produced, people pray before starting to take the roots and then manufacturing them and so on. So yeah, then you make your little batch of, let's say, your home, instead of your home grappa or whatever, you have your own homemade special things that you can make your friends try, either for fun or for wellness, and that's great. But is that a solution for the mothers in Uruguay? No. But no, also because I don't expect everyone to have the time and the tools and the capacity, or even the clean soil. I mean, you can be as strict as you want on your own way of cultivating, but I'm thinking, for example, I come from north of Italy, where there is a lot of growing and completely non-organic. So you can be as organic as you want, but then you will have to put so many bushes to protect your land that basically the patch that you have available is super tiny. So yeah, it can't work. Like, you need to basically reflect to real life, and real life is not like we all have this like massive land of organic and nirvana, and everything is gonna be great because you have great intentions behind it. Yeah.
Oh, very good points. And now I'm gonna bring up the obvious stigma, the stoner. Let's talk about stoners. When you hear the word stoner, what do you think of? What comes to mind? I'm going to share what comes to my mind. It's usually a man. It's true. Sorry, but it's true. But it's really an image that comes to mind. So what do you guys think of when you hear the word stoner? And why are we so afraid to be called a stoner?
I think Stefan just said it before. I mean, he just said it before, exactly that image of the unaccomplished, too lazy, da-bi-da-bi-da.
So it's measured with productivity.
Absolutely. I mean, and unfortunately, I think still in the type of world we live in, success of a person is based a lot on the ultimate goal of their productivity, which also I find pretty strange, but that's for another topic probably.
Go on, what comes to mind?
I mean, you guys made some great points, but it is true. I really think about like productivity, like the stereotype of the lazy stoner. The thing that I think is interesting too is that I feel like there's this culture too with working cannabis, is that we can work and go to these conferences, but I don't know that everyone is like, it's acceptable to like socially admit that you're using cannabis, you know, either, or even if you're like medicinally using it before work. I think that there's still a lot with that, and it's seen as, like, I know we were talking about a colleague that can use cannabis at any time of day, and it actually calms their mind and they do better. Whereas I think that the intention, and when people look at it, you think, okay, well, if they use it, they're not going to get anything done. They're just going to sit around and smoke and eat food and clock out. And I think that that's, you know, perpetuating that, because a lot of us are here fighting for it, and I think that it should be more acceptable in the workplace as well, within bounds, within boundaries.
Well, that's interesting because, yeah, you go for a few beers for lunch, you come back to work, and that's okay. But yeah, what are people going to think of you if you go out, have a joint, come back, and you're high?
Well, I think it's about amount too, like amount of use. You know, like for instance, like you talked about like people making their own stuff. I'm a big fan of people making their own stuff. I do my own coconut oils, and I put that coconut oil in my coffee, and I do only like 1/4 teaspoon, and I take it every single day. And I do it before I go to work, but no one can know that's in my coffee. I mean, now obviously because it's out there, you guys know my secrets. But it makes me better at my job because there's so much going on and there's so much to do in this industry. I bet everyone in this audience is doing 15 things right now while watching this panel. You're probably posting, talking about it, like figuring out, you know, content and scheduling meetings. We've got so much work to do that it helps me close some of those tabs in my brain. And I don't want to feel like me using that to help me get work done makes me any less productive in the eyes of my employers.
And I think just like stoner is a stereotype that we have to try to get rid of, but stereotypes in general are bad. You know, we all have a different face, we all have a different DNA, and we all have a different endocannabinoid system. So some people react to cannabis in a way which makes them more productive, and others become couch potatoes or whatever you want to call them. And so everybody has to find their own inner balance, you know, that famous homeostasis, which is the basics also of what the endocannabinoid system does. And at the end, your productivity is something you have to see whether you're productive or not, right? So too much coffee also makes you too nervous and you're not productive, but nobody's going to tell you, hey, don't have another coffee. But ultimately, those are really personal things, I think, if you really want to take away the stereotype.
Yeah, for me, a stoner is someone who misuse cannabis, who use it way too much. For some people, it's the best to use cannabis in the morning to start the day. For me not, and then I get too lazy. But I know it for myself. I know exactly when it's good for me to use cannabis and when not. And I don't use it every day. But some days I start earlier, some days I start later. But every day is different.
So you're an accountable stoner.
Yeah, like I would say, sure, the misuse of cannabis, if you use too much, it happens for fun and party like last night or the night before, but not on a regular basis. But that doesn't mean I'm a stoner. For me, a stoner is somebody who uses it on a daily basis. For me,
like almost abusing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's his intentions.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's important we are the industry, so it's really important we check our own bias at the door. I remember once I was visiting Stefan Meyer at his place. He was working there, so I was just passing by behind one of his several calls, and he was on a call with some colleagues. Some of them were from Canada. And for me, it was very peculiar, the fact that without taking off the screen camera, so like, oh, sorry, now my camera isn't working. Oh no, they were in front of the camera. A couple of them took it up. And for me, I mean, I've been working in this industry now 11 years, and so I should be totally okay with that. But I was like, oh, it's just like the corporate world for you, you know? And so then I realized that also I might be part of the problem if I find that shocking. Because I might not have found that shocking if they had like the little sip of panache or radler, as you call it here. So I think it's important also, I mean, this is the reason of this panel, like where is our bias? And I think you, Farida, were mentioning as well on an employing point of view. Do I want to employ someone that clearly looks like someone that is a massive consumer? But then the point is that one. As we all mentioned, there are some people that if they aren't consumers, they're not going to be as good workers as they could. So I think it's to keep this point always in check.
And that's the thing, it starts with us, as an individual for yourself and how you perceive things. And it's an awareness, right? Let's talk about women and stigmas with cannabis.
I would like to start, sorry, Becca, then I'll, yeah, since we're the women, right? I would also like to...
The men can mansplain if they would like. That's fine.
So as I said, I work in the medical side and healthcare side. So one of the toughest part is always when it comes to the point of the mother or the woman that wants to become a mother, or the doctor that has to, what do I do with, shall I take off this medication? I'm talking about a medical patient. So let's, for example, a lot of conditions, hemicrania, fibro, a lot of conditions that we considered deficiency, the result of a deficiency of the endocannabinoid system. Mainly they are, the incidence is way higher on women. So then it comes to this point of the life of a woman that she might become a mother. And there, it really is troubling for pretty much any doctor. What do I do with this? Because cannabis was working so well, shall I take her off? Or shall I keep her on it? Because then there is a massive stigma from the other colleagues. Some weeks ago we were at Cannabis Europa in London, and there was actually a panel on women's health, and Dr. Danny Gordon was talking about the fact that she was completely agreeing on the importance for women that found their balance for treating their pathology with medical cannabis. But at the same time, she wasn't feeling brave enough, she said, I'm just quoting her words, to make a prescription to a woman that was either pregnant or breastfeeding. I think here it really is important then to, and I'm sorry, on this I work in education, so I'm gonna repeat this, but it's really, really important, the education side on this. For example, there are it's different, the metabolism in terms of THC, OH, and so on. Between a product that has a pharmacokinetics, for example, through inhalation or through an oral consumption. And this is an important difference in the rate of penetration, for example, in the fetus. So then it's really a matter of what type of product it's gonna be best for this state of condition. Another situation is that of breastfeeding, because of course, as some of you may know, in our own human milk, also animal milk, there are endocannabinoids. There is a lot of 2-arachidonic glycerol. So it's actually a great matrix, a great vehicle for cannabinoids. So usually, most of the time, breastfeeding is one of the most difficult moments for, you know, as an administration of cannabis rather than actually pregnancy. And then you need to take in consideration the quality of the life, not only of the mother, but also of the child. Because, I mean, the postpartum depression, it's a real thing. So if you think about a patient that so far was balanced with her medication, you remove her medication, so you're unbalancing her. And then she's also going through a very crazy unbalancing moment of her life. I mean, the day of giving birth is the highest amount of neurosteroids that anyone can secrete. Then what do you do? And then we have, on the other side, a very well-designed and very nice protocol on benzodiazepines. Is that a good solution? I'm sorry, I bring this up because we often have this conversation on the fact that even in our medical community of cannabis doctors or doctors that have been prescribing for a long time, but because cannabis, as you all know, is not a first-line treatment, then they feel safer, especially in the situation of a woman planning a pregnancy, to use stuff that actually, if you look at, has a much shorter window of safety, because you can die and you can have a pretty bad addiction with, for example, benzodiazepines.
Okay, so I'm going to add in my own story with my own experience based on what you said, because we have like the clinical point of view and then the patient point of view. So I have a 4-year-old and I was pregnant while I still had cancer, so I was still a medical patient using cannabis in the US where it was recreationally legal. I was they decided to let me continue on with it, and I was very open about it. But I was also intentional with my use. You know, I wasn't aiming to get high. I used very little. I worked on weekly using tinctures and tried to do as best as I could. And but it didn't stop them from sending in a social worker once I gave birth. And I cannot tell you how terrifying it is to go through a 20-hour labor, an emergency C-section, to have someone come into your room then and interview you about your medical cannabis use with a social worker right there. You think you're going to lose your child, and this is something that's a really big issue. Whereas they didn't touch on breastfeeding at all for me. That was not even a thing. So I know you said it's kind of like a focus point, whereas it was not even a concern. The concern was you used cannabis during your pregnancy, you told us you were using it, we're going to test you and the kid. If anything comes back positive, we're going to have to take this and see it through. And mind you, I was in a legal state, and with doctor's permission. So this is definitely a topic we need to touch on. We need to protect our mothers out there, because it is not easy to switch medicine and mess up the already road raging hormones going on during pregnancy and then afterwards. So I think it's an important thing to highlight.
Yeah, and I want to know what the men think.
Yeah, well, you know, this is absolutely, you know, when you listen to these stories, it's a little bit, it takes away your breath. It's like, why would you have to speak in front of a social worker after you gave birth when cannabis was helping you? This is still part of the stigma. These are part of the things that have to change. And again, as Viola was saying, if the alternative is benzodiazepines, then we should really have a serious conversation. I am totally in favor of, you know, defending and supporting women for their use. Absolutely.
The crazy thing too, I forgot to add, is that both tests came back negative. So they only had my admission. So that's the thing. So they used my word against me. So I thought that was pretty interesting for science sake, though, that nothing came back with positive.
Did you guys want to add any last bit? We have about 4 minutes. Well, I said we're not going to ask questions. Does anyone have a question?
All right, we'll ask one question. Let's hear it for Farida Hussein and
Yeah, so just a quick question is, in your opinion, when it comes to Germany, how long will it be before you'll see in culture it becoming more accepted?
I don't think that we will get it in our lifetime. That we will see it. It takes longer, much longer.
Yeah, I can maybe share a quick experience I had in Uruguay. I was there in 2015, so 1 year after they legalized. And at that time, even the people in the ministries, so people working for the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, they were fighting it who had to sign the licenses, because it's legal, but I don't know, maybe I lose my job, no? And that takes a long time to kind of change. The good news is that nobody lost their job, nobody died. As we know, cannabis is not going to kill you, and so slowly there is a process of normalization. But that's what I was saying before: the importance of getting together as a lobby. You really look at alcohol and tobacco, and they have hundreds of lawyers paid to go and defend the interest of the market, the interest of the sector, and we are still a little bit sometimes fighting against each other in a kind of too competitive way. That's really one of the issues also. So if you really want to change, you have to go together, convince the media, convince the institutions, break down all these issues, like a social worker should not go and visit a mother the same day after she gave birth. That's really that's human rights, in my opinion, that you're going against. So that really is a little bit the soul of the problem, I think.
And in general, change comes because we talk about things. So just being more aware. In general, these conferences add so much value in that sense.
Yeah, for example, just an example from Italy. Okay, we have a medical law now almost a decade. The majority of doctors that we train, they are over 50. Why? Why is that? Because they are already in a safe place of their career, okay? The young doctors, they don't want to know anything about cannabis. So I think this, it will change, but it's a slow process, and again, the consciousness, in my opinion, comes from very different things. One of these is education. Another thing is working. This happens a lot in Czech Republic, for example. You work in a store and you see from the shampoo to everything with a cannabis leaf. You know, this starts to give different images, so the grandmother starts to not completely go crazy if then the doctor is starting to talk to her about cannabis. But yeah, it will take a while, and again, the commitment of all of us as a united industry from all different aspects.
Great, thank you very much. We're out of time. Let's hear it once again for a fascinating panel.